Pokemon fans, Tamashii here. Right now, Pokemon is giving away a new legendary Pokemon every month over the Nintendo Network for Gen 6 Pokemon games as part of the 20th anniversary celebration. This got me thinking. I've talked about the strongest legendaries, but I've never really talked about what my personal favorite legendary Pokemon are. For a lot of kids, legendary Pokemon serve as one of our earliest power fantasies. The Pokemon games put you in the role of the hero, sure, but legendary Pokemon are what set you apart from the average trainer. You're the only one who can catch and train these mythical beasts, and the fact that they're so rare and powerful in the Pokemon universe just makes our interactions with them all the more special. So of course, legendary Pokemon have worked their way into my heart as some of my fondest memories with Pokemon. And today, I'm going to be counting down my top 10 favorite legendary Pokemon and sharing the creatures that I found the most awe-inspiring and empowering throughout my life. Let's get started! Number 10, the Lake Trio. For all of my griping about Gen 4, I will concede that it gave us some really cool legendaries. The Lake Guardians, Uxie, Mesprit, and Azelf are based on the Imperial Regala of Japan, a sword that represents valor, a mirror that represents wisdom, and a jewel that represents benevolence. In the Pokemon world, the Lake Guardians were created by Arceus to bring similar qualities to the human race, Uxie providing the gift of intelligence, Mesprit providing the gift of emotions, and Azelf providing the gift of willpower. Together, their names stand for the pronouns you, me, and us. These Pokemon are some of my favorite parts of the creation myth in the Pokemon universe. They're important because they brought so many qualities that I value to humanity, which makes them some of the more vital legendaries in the Pokemon lore. But plot relevance aside, I also like their designs. They're the smallest legendary trio out there, which might make them seem less powerful, but in a lot of ways it actually gives me the opposite impression. Their power lies not in brute strength, but in the strength of their minds, hearts, and wills, which shows just how powerful those things can be. Number 9, Xerneas. Much like the Lake Trio, I'm enamored with Xerneas as a concept. Xerneas is based off a stag from Norse mythology that eats from Yggdrasil, the Tree of Life, causing its horns to drip with dew. In turn, Xerneas is the Pokemon that gives eternal life through the horns on its head. At the end of its life, Xerneas shares its energy with all the living things around it, and transforms into a tree to sleep for 1,000 years. What I like about Xerneas is that it's a benevolent force in nature, creating forests and refreshing the environment wherever it goes. I think it's a beautiful Pokemon with a meaningful purpose, and if I had to pick one Pokemon to bring to life in the real world, this is one of the only legendaries that can do no harm, only good. As a bit of an environmentalist myself, I really like the idea of a Pokemon that can restore the planet, so Xerneas' lore really aligns well with the things that I value as a person. Xerneas comes in pretty low on this list though, because in spite of how much I like it as a design and as a legend, I am a little disappointed with how small a role it ended up playing in Kalos. And with Generation 6 seemingly drawing to a close, it's sounding like that's how it'll stay. Number 8, Cresselia. I seem to have a thing for pretty benevolent legends, and Cresselia is no different. Existing as part of the lunar duo with Darkrai, Cresselia is the legendary that brings humans good dreams, while Darkrai only brings nightmares. It has a very romantic design, representing the crescent moon, and it's also female only, which is interesting considering its counterpart Darkrai is just genderless. Of course, this brings to mind Sailor Moon, which is one of my childhood heroes, so I'll admit that has a lot to do with why I like it. When it was first released in Gen 4 as a roaming Pokemon, it didn't really get much lore or backstory, which was disappointing to me since it was such a cool looking Pokemon. But in Black and White, on certain occasions, the ghost of a girl will appear on Marvelous Bridge, and disappear if the player walks towards her. At the end of the bridge, a lady explains that the girl used to play around the area with an Abra before the bridge was built. In Black and White 2, the same girl appears in the Strange House, and tells the player she's trapped in a nightmare and was waiting on a bridge to return a wing to a Pokemon. When you get to the end, you find a lunar wing. If you return to Marvelous Bridge with the wing, Cresselia will appear, and free the girl's spirit from its nightmare. This is one of my favorite moments in a Pokemon game, because it tells an unusual story in a unique way, and I'm glad it gave me a memory to go with one of my favorite Pokemon. It makes me wonder if maybe the Ghost Girl in Lumiose might also have something to do with this legendary duo, and we might meet her again in a future game. Number 7, Mewtwo. I've already talked a lot about Mewtwo back in my top 10 villains video, so I'll try not to repeat myself too much here. Because I was introduced to Mewtwo back when the anime was the primary format I experienced Pokemon in, most of what I like about him is based on his character in the Pokemon movies. I wasn't kidding when I said Mewtwo is basically the existential crisis Pokemon. Though these days there are more man-made legends, at the time Mewtwo was the only Pokemon to be created in a laboratory, and this, combined with his high intelligence, caused Mewtwo to question his existence and why he was born. It's a pretty tough thing to go through, to have your entire being hinge on the wants and needs of others, especially when he has Ambertooth ripped away from him. The pain drives him to try to destroy the humanity that created him. But after meeting Mew, the Pokemon he was cloned from, and seeing a human like Ash exhibit kindness towards all Pokemon, he realizes that the circumstances of his birth are irrelevant, because he can still do something meaningful with his life. Though the dub of the first movie kinda bungled the message a bit, it was still a really impactful thing to learn as a kid. Often, it's easy to feel worthless, and like the world would be better off without you. But every day you have a chance to leave this earth better than you found it. It's a powerful message, and it took a powerful but angsty Pokemon to teach us that. Number 6, the Legendary Dogs. Though other generations have more cool legendaries per region, Gen 2 to me hands down has the best group of legends overall. With Gold and Silver being our first sequel since Pokemon began, they had an air of mystery around them, unmatched by any game before or since. Our little brains worked overtime, speculating and wondering what we might find in this new region, and what powerful new Pokemon we'd meet there. The Legendary Dogs, Entei, Suicune, and Raikou, were not only the first new legends we came across, but our first taste of roaming legends, and I can't tell you how exciting it was to run into a wild Entei in the grass outside of Ecruteak for the first time as a kid. My heart just about stopped. Entei, Suicune, and Raikou embody the 3 events that struck the brass tower in Ecruteak, Raikou being the lightning that struck the tower, Entei being the flames that burned the tower, and Suicune being the winds and rain that put it out. The 3 beasts reside inside the ruins of the tower until the player finds them and brings them back to life. From there, it's a chase around the region to try and catch them all. What I love about these 3 is not only that this was the only time finding a roaming legend was really an event for me, but they also felt so important and so necessary to the balance of nature in Johto. I felt like I needed to catch them. They were beautiful, mysterious, and kind of scary, but they were mine if I could just win their little game. Number 5, Lugia. As mentioned before, the Gen 2 era was one of the most exciting times to be a Pokemon fan, just because there was so much to feed our hungry imaginations. Not only were there new games, but there were new movies centered around the Legendaries, and they went out of their way to blow Gen 1 out of the water. The second movie has always been my favorite for a couple reasons, the first being because I'm a lifelong Pokeshipper, but also because it was an epic sort of adventure that we'd never seen before at that point in Pokemon history. The first movie had smaller stakes, a smaller scale. It mostly took place in one location. This one was saving the world, a legendary prophecy, a set of mysterious islands, and a ton of legendary Pokemon. And to top it off, there was Lugia, the coolest new legendary Pokemon that had to be summoned with a beautiful song that only Melody could perform. It gave me a story where young kids had all the power and responsibility and still pulled through and saved the day, making it the ultimate power fantasy. And up until that point, I couldn't imagine a Pokemon more powerful than Mewtwo. And then here Lugia comes kicking ass and taking names. And where Mewtwo was much more of a villain, or at least more of an anti-hero, Lugia was a straight-up heroic force for good, and that resonated with me and inspired me like no other. Number 4, Celebi. I've completed the Pokédex in a number of generations at this point, but the first time I ever did was in Heart Gold back in Gen 4. I'm not sure I've ever talked about how much I truly love Heart Gold and Soul Silver, but to me, they're still hands down some of the best Pokemon games ever made, as Pokemon games in their own right, not just as remakes. When I first played it, I loved it so much that I felt compelled to finally go the distance and catch them all. And the first time you complete the dex is always the hardest, so it felt like a real accomplishment. For a long time, I was missing just one Pokemon, Celebi, but I wanted to wait until the then upcoming Celebi event to finish it. There was word that there would be a special Celebi distributed over the Nintendo Wi-Fi connection for Heart Gold and Soul Silver. And with the Celebi event being removed from Crystal back in the day being one of the biggest letdowns in Pokemon history, it just felt right to wait until it was released again to be the last piece of my Pokédex puzzle. I was not disappointed. The Celebi event from Heart Gold and Soul Silver is one of the best events in Pokemon history. For a long time, there is fan speculation that Giovanni was Silver's father, but now not only did we get concrete proof, we got to go back in time and see it with our own eyes, as well as battle Giovanni for closure on the whole Team Rocket arc. I'll never forget the sheer joy and pride I felt seeing my Pokédex read 493 out of 493, and the awesome fan service event was just the icing on the cake. And for that, I have Celebi to thank. Number 3, Articuno. I guess the majority of my favorite legends come from the first and second generations, partially because when you're young, everything seems so much bigger and important, and the sheer scale leaves a lasting impression on you. As a kid, pixels could be monstrous, intimidating, even frightening, but more than that, they could be awe-inspiring and larger than life. Of the legendary birds, Zapdos was actually the first legendary I ever caught, But even then, I thought Articuno was so much more majestic. In Generation 1, ice types were far and few between, but ice type moves could be some of the most devastating, with an unfairly high freeze chance and fewer ways to break free from it. So when I first picked Articuno in Pokemon Stadium, it became a team favorite every time, and for once, it made me feel like I was actually doing something right, even if I was exploiting an overpowered mechanic. When I was younger, I assumed I was just bad at everything naturally, especially video games, because I had low self-esteem, and my friends told me girls were bad at games. With Articuno, I actually won, which was something new for me. It gave me a feeling of accomplishment I rarely felt back then, and it's something I'll never forget. Articuno was my first experience of knowing that I could succeed at something, even if maybe I'm not naturally talented at it, which is an important thing for a kid to learn. Number 2, Mew. Pokemon was always a pioneer in cranking the hype machine. At the time of Red and Blue's release, the thought of having an event to download a character in a game was unprecedented, and Mew became one of the most coveted entities in video game history. Well, until players discovered a certain in-game glitch anyway. And let me tell you, they were super stingy when it came to distributing Mew in the US in Generation 1. First, only 1,500 customers to a Toys R Us store would be entered to win a Mew, and then only 200 people per store would win the opportunity to return on a different day and download a Mew. And if you entered to win through Nintendo Power Magazine, only 1,000 prizes were given away, and people who didn't have game cards could enter to receive a t-shirt in place of a Mew, meaning people who didn't even own the game could take Mews from people who did. Owning a Yoshi R Mew was a huge deal, and Mew wasn't widely distributed in the US again until 2006 for the Lucario and the Mystery of Mew movie. This time, on one day only for 3 hours only, anyone could visit a Toys R Us, wait in line, and have a Mew transferred to their game. Though, unless you had Ruby or Sapphire, you would have to make sure that your copy of the game had the national dex. Otherwise, it would prevent you from obtaining a Mew. It had been 7 years since the last chance to get a legitimate Mew, and I had missed out on all the hullabaloo from the first Mew distribution since I was too young to understand it all. The hype was real, and I was not going to miss out on this. My mom drove me down to Toys R Us, and I waited in line, heart pounding, worried the line would move too slow and they'd run out of Mews or stop distributing them. I got up to the counter, and the guy insisted I give him my Swampert for a Mew since he was tired of getting Wurmples. I was so eager that I didn't even care, and just like that, I was the proud owner of a mystery Mew. These days, I am glad Pokemon distributions have become more accessible so that everyone can enjoy them. But the exclusivity of events like this made distribution Pokemon insanely valuable and meaningful. And I still treasure my Mew to this day. It was an experience as a Pokemon fan that I'll never forget, and one I'm grateful for. And my number 1 favorite legendary Pokemon is Jirachi. I'm honestly not sure how to explain what Jirachi means to me without sounding completely out of my mind, but here goes. When I was a freshman in high school, one cold night in the middle of the desert, I saw a shooting star while on a camping trip with a friend. I made a wish. I wanted to meet my best friend. They lived so far away from me, and it seemed impossible, but I wanted to meet them in person no matter what. So I closed my eyes and wished as hard as I could. And just 1 year later, I made it happen. It probably had nothing to do with the star, but to me, it was a sign, and a symbol of faith. I just needed to believe in myself, and I could do anything. Ever since then, shooting stars have been an important symbol in my life. So of course, with Jirachi being the concept of a shooting star personified, it's my favorite legendary Pokemon. As an event-only Pokemon, Jirachi doesn't get a lot of backstory or lore associated with it, so most of what I love about Jirachi is based on my own projected feelings. But I think a lot of the time, that's what we're meant to do. That's the point of a legendary, really. They're meant to empower, inspire, and spark the imagination. And that, more than their base stats, is what makes them so powerful. So there you have it, my top 10 favorite legendaries. Thanks for watching, and if you liked what you saw and want to see more, feel free to click on these annotations to check out some of my other Pokemon videos. Or as always, you can click here to subscribe for more Pokemon videos every week. See ya!